Okay, I very quickly move on to the next session. Next session is redefining customer experience in the digital age, innovations in marketing, and for that we have Mr. Aditya Bhamidipaty, founder and CEO, First Hive.
All right, thank you very much. It's great to be here. Before I actually get into my session, it'll be interesting to know how many people here are marketeers or have anything to do with marketing, so I can contextualize what I talk accordingly. Okay. How many of you receive marketing? Everybody, right? How many of you think your company's marketing to you know you? Or what percentage of marketing communication you actually receive you think is making sense to you, and is it majority of it making sense or majority of it is not making sense? How many of you say majority doesn't make sense? Oh, wow. Okay. So that's a very good context. Do I have a clicker? Okay. So this is the global marketing spend is now estimated to be about 1.1 trillion, 1.1 trillion, 900 billion, that's the broad range. That effectively translates into $2 million being spent every minute globally, right? $2 million every minute around the world. And most of us think it doesn't make sense to us, right? And this is not a single example. All of us go through this. I have received coupons for my from my cab aggregator for a city that I was not in many times. It's almost like my cab aggregator doesn't want me using the coupons because this is an app that works on location. How could it give me a coupon for another? Or I'm sure I have experienced routinely my bank trying to sell me a personal loan when I don't want one. So this is a very, very, very common issue, and I think this room is a very interesting representative set of what the world sees. And this is really what happens from a marketeer perspective. 98% of marketing spends fall into what is called as a leaky bucket, which is money that you're spending that you're not able to attribute specifically to a customer action, which is translating into a conversion for you. 98%. This is probably the only other $1 trillion industry with that high level of a failure rate, other than the diamond industry maybe, where people are actually sifting through rivers to find those particles. But it's really that bad, right? And the thing is, marketeers have actually made peace with it because it is a complex problem. It's a very stubborn problem that they deal with, right? And the reason for the complexity is this. 3 different dimensions of change that the marketeer is having to encounter and deal with. The first is the number of different tools, channels, and interfaces on which you are having consumer interactions has exploded. Life was easy in the 1980s. All you had to do was have a wonderful graphic designer in Madison Avenue who would churn out these beautiful looking single-page advertisements for you that could go to the world. That's no longer the case. Right? So you have all of these new interfaces where customers are interacting, and that has led to evolution in consumer behavior itself in terms of what they expect to consume, how they expect the interaction to be in, and that has a direct bearing on what you see in conversions. And third, and this is something that all of us are very familiar with in the recent past, regulation. Governments around the world have woken up to how privacy laws need to be strengthened. And the general direction of all of this is a recognition that data is owned by the individual, not by the enterprise. So that has implications again from a marketing standpoint. This is something all of us have seen, I'm sure, many, many times, the evolution of marketing in the last couple of decades and how it has disrupted everything that we know. But the biggest thing that it disrupted is this. If you went to a B school or are familiar with marketing, you would have known about this classical marketing journey of a consumer, which is awareness to trial, to purchase, to advocacy, and that's gone. That's long dead and buried. All of us today are concurrently consuming and concurrently transacting. We consume across different devices, we consume across different channels, and we transact while consuming. So this has led to a dramatic change in expectations. The expectation of consistency from the brand, which means I am no longer okay picking up the phone, talking to my brand or enterprise or banker or whoever, and somebody asking, saying, what can I do for you? You expect to take off from where you left off in the last channel, maybe on the browser, or if you face a problem somewhere and you pick the phone, you expect them to know what you're dealing with. So that is one of the biggest things that has changed. And the other thing that changed, because of all of this digital new channels, is the number of tools. And this is actually so, I kept it like this also for impact, for you to really see. At last count, there are 7,500 tools in marketing. 7,500 tools. In fact, if you go and talk to most enterprises, they'll tell you that a typical enterprise today has anywhere from 20 tools to about 70 tools. And these are the mid-sized enterprises. If you look at large global enterprises, we're talking anywhere from mid-50s to a couple of 100 tools across the different countries. So you can imagine what that means for the marketeer. I'll come back to that. The problem is this. All of these different tools essentially lead to data silos, because most of these tools don't talk to each other. They're all disconnected. Different tools have different kinds of data that they're capturing about consumer behavior. Each of these different tools have separate primary keys, and therefore as a marketeer, you are never really sure who you're talking to. Therefore, what you end up doing is you pump a lot of money on top of the funnel, and you basically do a spray and pray. You're throwing a bunch of darts out there, and you're hoping that some of it sticks. And we see the result of it, right? The 2% conversion. And it's become such a complicated thing that this industry actually applauds a 2.5% conversion rate. Right? And that's, so you have to let it sink in. 97.5% failure rate is applauded. Right? So that is a complex problem. The other issue that has happened from a marketing standpoint is the excessive focus on optimization. Because of this complicated tool landscape, and because there's intense effort to make sure that these tools talk to each other and can the data come together or not, the focus has then shifted to the more immediate objectives of saying, look, I have one tool which sends email campaigns, can I get them to do it better? I have another tool which is looking at my web retargeting, can I just get it to do better? And therefore you had this mushrooming of multiple mini brains. So this has become a multi-headed hydra with all of those different heads doing local optimization, but there's really no single central brain. Right? Something that is making sense of everything for the marketeer. That lack of unified enterprise identity for a consumer is the root cause of everything that happens in the marketing world. And the biggest impact you see of that is the dependence of marketers, therefore, on networks, which are ad networks or inorganic spends. There was a recent conversation that I saw somewhere which said 45%, since we are also in NASSCOM startup related event, 45% of most fundraise money goes into ad networks, right? Is what somebody was saying a couple of days back. 45%. Globally as well, the amount of inorganic spends that go into digital ads is close to about 30%, 35%, which is going into ad spends. So that dependence on third-party data to target customers is all driven by the fact that, look, my data is so siloed, my data is scattered, I don't really know who I'm talking to, and therefore I end up depending on networks that will help me get access to those customers. And of course, there's GDPR, which complicates that aspect of it because your dependence on this third-party data can only be limited. And that's actually an equalizer because every one of your competition also has access to the same data, which is the third-party data. So that does not become a differentiator, that's actually an equalizer for the marketer, which means that the cost of that only increases with every incremental competition trying to leverage the same data set. Right? The only resolution to all of this is identity building, which is as an enterprise, can I consolidate my first-party data? From a regulation standpoint as well, the safest, most secure way to handle the consumer data is to look at it from a first-party PII owned data and how do you use that as an asset for you to drive relevant communication. What does that mean for the marketer? It means you need a single system which actually ingests everything across the marketing landscape, everything from structured to unstructured, digital to offline to social to browser to mobile applications to bots to voice to everything. And only when you are able to ingest all this cumulative data and make sense of this identity of the consumer sitting behind it is when you will be able to actually deliver a consistent experience of the consumer across all these channels. Because then these channels are not depending on their local brains, but there is actually a central marketing brain or a central system of intelligence that's driving these conversations with the customers. Two things which make it the two things that make this possible is first, all these channels don't give you the same primary vectors, and therefore the only way you can connect these otherwise disconnected pieces of data is by using ML. And that is a big way in which you kind of go beyond that chasm of not being able to use this data to actually connecting the data. The second is once the data starts coming in, how do you then start making the data actionable and help you drive your ROI? And that's really the area where your AI starts coming in. The traditional marketing campaigns start with saying, look, I want to send an email campaign. This is my content. These are my 10 million users. How do I now optimize my open rates? How do I optimize my click-throughs? I'm taking a very simple example, but this is usually how it is. Now, the moment you start with saying, I want to send an email campaign and these are my users, you're already down the rabbit hole. You've already chosen the channel, you've already chosen the content, you've already chosen the audience. What are you left with? Only the optimization of time, which is a single dimensional optimization, which is what your typical tools will do. But the moment you start bringing in AI into this, which is a central connected brain, you don't need to now start with the choice of channel, communication, and audience. You start with communication. Saying, look, I want to talk about this product. Now, can the system then optimize the choice of the right audience for you? So that, like we saw in one of the first cartoons, you're not going to the wrong audience. You're going to the right audience, which is most relevant for this content. And then, if you have 10 million users, can we optimize the form factor, time of nudge, and channel preference for every one of those audience? So instead of you doing a list of communication, which is one email campaign going to 10 million users, you're actually running 10 million journeys. Each one of these journeys is an independent journey that is driven from the brand to that user, dependent on that specific user's interest, propensity to respond, so on and so forth. And that can only be done at scale when you have an AI engine running. So that is the second piece that happens when you start having an enterprise marketing brain. This entire piece is where you're seeing a lot of evolution now. Traditionally, the technical term for this is the customer data platform. The traditional customer data platform started with the first level only, which is piping, which is can I bring in data from multiple different systems. So you have source systems, you have destination systems. Excuse me. But the ideal CDP choice is a CDP that can ingest your full breadth of data sources. It's because you're trying to solve the consumer identity puzzle, and if this is a 52-piece puzzle, you cannot close the puzzle with 30 pieces. So you need to have the ability to bring in every single data source. The second is the ability to connect non-identity based behaviors, which is all the unstructured data that you get. The third is the actionability, which is the whole real-time and AI-led communication. And fourth is how are you storing and creating trackers on these identities that you're building, and how are you conscious of not crossing those first party, second party, third party barriers. So you're actually assisting the enterprise in navigating those privacy regulations rather than that becoming a deterrence for the marketeer. So that is really what, I mean, we are seeing tremendous amount of work in this globally. We are a customer data platform as well. Everything that I talked to you about is something that we do. And we are seeing a lot of interesting work in this space globally as well. That's kind of all that I wanted to share. It's a really interesting space, and we are very, very glad that there's a lot of innovation happening in this space from India as well.
Thank you, Aditya. So questions you can have offline. That's what I would recommend because of the crunch in time. So on behalf of NASSCOM, I would like to thank you.
Thank you.
And we look forward to have you again.